That same morning, a Heinkel HE-115 from Küstenfliegergruppe 906 struck the Liberty ship SS Christopher Newport about 35 nautical miles northeast of Bear Island. The submarine HMS P-614 attempted to scuttle her, but she remained afloat until the German submarine U-457 sank her at 8:08 a.m. That evening, 6 bombers made an abortive attack. The USS Wainwright disrupted an air attack on the Convoy earlier the same day. Later that evening, an attack by 25 torpedo bombers sank the SS William Hooper. Overhead, the Luftwaffe's reconnaissance planes continued to shadow the British ships. It was the height of Arctic summer, with sunset lasting only a couple of minutes. A British destroyer signaled one of the German planes asking if it could circulate in the other direction for a while as we become dizzy. The German replied, "Whatever it takes to please an Englishman," and switched to a reconnaissance orbit in the opposite direction. Before issuing his orders, Pound consulted an intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Norman Denning, at Whitehall to confirm that Tirpitz had left Altenfjord. Though Denning was unsure if Tirpitz was still there, he explained that his sources would have indicated if the ship had or was about to put to sea. Several hours after Pound's orders were issued, it was confirmed that Tirpitz was still anchored at Altenfjord. Although Tirpitz's battle group sailed on July 5th, the operation to attack the convoy with surface ships was cancelled, and the ships returned to Altenfjord that same day. Meanwhile, the multiple layers of British command were grappling with contradictory orders. British intelligence deduced that the German warships would attack PQ-17 when it reached a position between 15 degrees and 30 degrees east, expected to happen sometime on July 4th. London relayed this information to Tovey, instructing that Hamilton could take his cruisers east of 25 degrees east to support the convoy unless Tovey ordered otherwise. At 12:30 p.m., the Admiralty gave Hamilton permission to proceed east of 25 degrees east if the situation required, unless Tovey issued contrary orders. This was a reversal of previous instructions, and since Tovey had no information to justify this change, he ordered Hamilton to withdraw when the convoy reached 25 degrees east or earlier at his discretion, unless the Admiralty confirmed that Tirpitz was not in the area. At 6:58 p.m., the Admiralty informed Hamilton that more information was expected soon and instructed him to stay with the convoy until further notice. Pound now feared the worst, though, that Tirpitz was at sea and heading straight for PQ-17. Convinced that the convoy needed to scatter, he overruled his men in London and at sea, despite having only negative evidence. At 9:11 p.m., he sent the signal, "Most immediate. Cruiser force withdraw westward at high speed." At 9:23 p.m. he followed with, "Immediate. Owing to threat from surface ships, convoy is to disperse and proceed to Russian ports." Finally, at 9:36 p.m. he issued another most immediate message, "Convoy is to scatter." These words sent chills down the spines of the men sailing in these merchant ships. This decision was a significant gamble by an officer not on the scene. For the first time in the Royal Navy's long and distinguished history, a convoy was ordered to scatter by someone higher in authority than the flag officer present at sea. Unbeknownst to the escort and convoy commanders, Tirpitz and its battle group were not advancing toward the convoy or anywhere near it. Tirpitz had departed Trondheim on July the 2nd for the port of Vestfjord. The following day, the Kriegsmarine Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Erik Raeder, received permission to move Tirpitz to Altenfjord to join the ships there. When the order to scatter the convoy was received, it had covered more than half of its route and had already lost 3 ships. The consequences for the merchantmen were dire. They were spread over a wide area, stripped of mutual protection and their trained escort. As the larger escort vessels retreated from the suspected German surface force, distress messages began to be received by the destroyers, and being bombed by a large number of planes. On fire in the ice, abandoning ship, 6 U-boats approaching on the surface. With the majority of the escorts ordered to return to Scapa Flow, Only the close escort of anti-aircraft auxiliaries, corvettes, minesweepers, and armed trawlers was left to protect the scattered ships. In the first 24 hours after the signal to scatter, 13 merchant ships and a rescue ship had been sunk. As July 5 turned to July 6, the first survivors of PQ-17 began reaching safe harbor at Novaya Zemlya. The AA ship Palomares, 3 minesweepers, the rescue ship Zamalek, and the Ocean Freedom arrived first. They were followed by the other AA ship, Pozorica, along with Le Malouine and the corvette Poppy. Le Malouine was sent back out to round up stray merchants, successfully bringing in 4 American freighters, Hoosier, Samuel Chase, El Capitan, and Benjamin Harrison. Soon after, 3 more trawlers arrived, along with the gallant Lotus, its decks awash and crowded with 60 survivors from Pancraft and River Afton. Meanwhile, the U-boat and aircraft attacks continued relentlessly. 7 ships strung out in a disorganized group in the northern Barents Sea hugged the ice as they made their way to Novaya Zemlya at full speed. Ju-88s and U-boats targeted the Pan-Atlantic, which was heading for the White Sea. A single bomb detonated Pan-Atlantic's cargo of cordite, causing her to sink within 3 minutes, much to the frustration of the U-boat skippers who had hoped to claim the target. 6 U-boats concentrated in this area. One of them, U-255, sank the American ships John Witherspoon on July 6th and Alcoa Ranger the next day. Empire Tide, still carrying her hurricane fighter, witnessed the sinkings and maneuvered into Mahler Bay to safety. On July 7th, more ships were lost, with U-355 sinking the 5,100-ton Britain Hartlebury and U-457 destroying the derelict Aldersdale. This was enough for the skipper of the Winston-Salem, who ran his ship aground in Obsiedia Bay and set up camp in an abandoned lighthouse nearby. In Metoshkin Strait, Captain Jauncey of Pozorica, the senior officer, summoned the skippers of the assembled ships to plan their next move. The anchorage was too exposed, so they decided to break out. On July 7th, the 17 ships left the anchorage and headed south. One of them, Benjamin Harrison, lost her way and returned to the anchorage before trying again. The ships initially took a westerly course to find clear water, but it was not until July 9th, amid clearing weather, that they could head south again. That morning, they discovered 2 boatloads of survivors from Pan-Atlantic and brought them aboard. Everyone watched for the promised Soviet aircraft, but instead a German reconnaissance plane appeared, revealing their position. In the thin night and twilight of July 9-10, the Luftwaffe launched 40 Ju-88s from KG-30. For 4 hours, the bombers attacked the merchant ships. The Hoosier and El Capitan were damaged by near misses and had to be abandoned. Poppy and Lord Austin picked up the crews, and the rescue ship Zamalek took on more than 240 survivors. U-boats later torpedoed the derelicts. The Luftwaffe then targeted Zamalek. A British sailor watching said, "One stick of bombs actually took the Zamalek right out of the water so that you could see daylight between the keel and the water." Despite engine damage from the shock, the engineers worked tirelessly to repair it. Fortunately, the ship had plenty of engineers from the various shipwrecks, and when she rejoined her group, she was greeted with loud cheers. Samuel Chase was also damaged and had to be towed by the minesweeper Halcyon. Finally, on July 11th, Dowding led his ships through the White Sea into the port of Archangel. There he found the Soviet tanker Donbass and the American freighter Bellingham, which had arrived on July 9th, along with the rescue ship Rohlin and the corvette Dianella. "Not a successful convoy," noted Dowding bitterly. 3 ships brought into port out of 37. However, there were still more ships out there. A second group of 5 vessels was still making its way in thanks to the efforts of Lieutenant J.A. Gradwell, who commanded the trawler Ayrshire. He had taken 3 freighters, Troubadour, Ironclad, and Silver Sword, under his wing when the scatter order was given. Using Troubadour with her reinforced bows as an icebreaker, they steamed 20 miles into the ice, as far as they could go. Once there, the crews painted their ships' hulls white to blend in with the icebergs. For 2 days, the ships hid in the ice, listening to distant distress calls. Finally, Gradwell led his group out of the ice, and a high-speed dash brought the ships to the north island of Novaya Zemlya on July 10th. They hid there for 24 hours before moving to the Matochkin Strait the next day. There, they found the Benjamin Harrison, the Soviet tanker Azerbaijan, and the icebreaker Merman. The Soviet trawler Kirov completed this colorful collection of ships. Gradwell reported to Archangel, "The situation at present is that there are 4 ships in Matochkin Strait. My Azdik is out of action, and the masters of the ships are showing unmistakable signs of strain. I much doubt if I could persuade them to make a dash to Archangel without a considerably increased escort and a promise of fighter protection at the entrance to the White Sea. Indeed, there has already been talk of scuttling ships near shore rather than going on to what they, with their present escort, consider certain sinking. In these circumstances, I submit that increased escort might be provided and that I may be informed as to how to obtain air protection. I shall remain in the Matochkin Strait until I receive a reply." Dowding read this plea and set out with Lotus, Lamalouine, and Poppy through the stormy Bielusha Bay to Novaya Zemlya. First, they found 12 exhausted survivors of Olopana. Poppy also found the American freighter Bellingham and signaled, "Do you want to be escorted?" The Americans, angry, replied, "Go to hell." Poppy's skipper, reading the message, said, "Can't say as I blame him." Then they found Winston-Salem hard aground but with survivors of Hartlebury and Washington aboard. Dowding continued searching and found the CAM ship Empire Tide, still with its Hurricane fighter, packed with exhausted survivors and unable to move. Dowding split Winston-Salem's supplies with the Empire Tide and pressed on. Empire Tide made ready to sail. Dowding arrived at Matochkin Strait on July 20th and transferred to the Soviet Merman, which would use her strengthened bows to lead the battered convoy home. They got out just in time. A day later, a U-boat showed up at the strait and found it empty. The convoy headed south, collecting Empire Tide while abandoning Winston-Salem. By July 22nd, the small convoy was joined by the AA ship Pozorica, the corvette Dianella, 3 minesweepers, and, most importantly, 2 Soviet destroyers. All ships reached Archangel safely on July 24th. 4 days later, 2 Soviet tugs refloated Winston-Salem and brought her to Archangel, bringing the total to 11 out of 33 ships that survived the bitter attacks on PQ-17. Next came the search for lifeboats. Soviet and British planes based in Murmansk scoured the area. Dianella set out on this grim task after refueling in Archangel on July 9th, returning on the 16th with 61 crew members from Empire Byron. 2 of Alcoa Ranger's lifeboats reached Novaya Zemlya, while a third reached the mainland at Cape Kanan Nos. 21 crewmen from Honomu were fortunate as their lifeboat was spotted by warships just before turning back. Another lifeboat rowed 360 miles from their ship's sinking location to Murmansk. 2 lifeboats from Bolton Castle reached the northern Russian coast after harrowing conflicts between Arab and British seamen. Their survival was aided by finding an abandoned lifeboat from El Capitan loaded with provisions. Another boat from Earlston landed in German-occupied Norway, where its 6 occupants were taken prisoner. Another boat with 17 survivors from Carlton also landed in Norway. Of the 37 ships that sailed from Iceland, 2 turned back, 8 were sunk by air attack, 40,425 tons, 7 by U-boats, 41,041 tons, and 9 were damaged by air attacks and finished off by U-boats, 61,255 tons. The losses included 430 tanks, 210 crated aircraft, 3,350 vehicles, and 99,336 tons of general cargo. A total of 153 merchant seamen, 107 American, lost their lives. Of the 24 confirmed ships sunk, 22 were large freighters, including 14 American vessels. From the dispatch cargo, the Soviets received only 896 vehicles, 164 tanks, 87 aircraft, and about 57,000 tons of military cargo. In 202 dive and torpedo bomber sorties, the Germans lost only 5 aircraft. No U-boats were sunk or damaged by Allied weaponry, though 3 U-boats were damaged by friendly fire. To make matters worse, the desperately needed supplies failed to arrive just as the Germans launched a massive offensive on the southern half of the Eastern Front, breaking through Soviet defenses in 2 weeks. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, chief of the Luftwaffe, awarded 3 Knight's Crosses to airmen who fought in the battle. The Navy claimed that their 11 U-boats had fired 72 torpedoes with 29 hits and explosions and credited 9 U-boats with kills. The Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, described the event as one of the most melancholy naval episodes in the whole of the war. An inquiry assigned no blame to anyone, since the orders were issued by the First Sea Lord, and blaming him was considered politically unacceptable. The Soviet Union did not believe that so many ships could be lost in one convoy and openly accused the Western Allies of lying. Despite the material help delivered, Convoy PQ-17 worsened Soviet-Allied relations in the short term, with the Soviets never acknowledging the efforts of Allied merchant seamen or sailors. Joseph Stalin and Soviet naval experts found it difficult to understand the Admiralty's order to scatter, which left cargo ships to reach Soviet ports without protection. Admiral King, already distrustful of the British, was furious with what he saw as Admiral Pound's mismanagement and promptly withdrew Task Force 39, sending it to the Pacific. He hesitated to conduct further joint operations under British command. Admiral Dan Gallery, USN, stationed in Iceland at the time, called PQ-17 a shameful page in naval history. In light of the Convoy PQ-17 disaster, the Admiralty proposed suspending the Arctic convoys until the ice receded and perpetual daylight passed. At a conference with Hitler, Raeder stated, "Our submarines and aircraft, which totally destroyed the last convoy, have forced the enemy to give up this route temporarily." At a meeting with the head of the Soviet military mission, Admiral Nikolai Kharlamov, and the Soviet ambassador in London, Ivan Maysky, the Soviets inquired about the next convoy, PQ-18. Pound responded that nothing could be done until better Russian air cover was arranged. Kharlamov criticized the order to withdraw the cruisers from Convoy PQ-17, which angered Pound, who admitted that PQ-17 was scattered on his order. Maysky remarked that even British admirals make mistakes. It was not until September that Convoy PQ-18 set out for North Russia. The convoy's defense scheme was revised, including a strong constant close escort of 16 destroyers and the new escort carrier HMS Avenger, equipped with 12 fighters and 3 Swordfish ASW aircraft. After the war, there was criticism of this delay from American and Soviet sources. Soviet historians provided various reasons for the suspension and reduction in supply caused by the halt in the Arctic convoys, with some attributing it to the fact that in 1942, Anglo-American ocean communications were destroyed. At least 16 officers and men of the Merchant Navy were honored for gallantry or distinguished service for their actions in the convoy. A supplement to the London Gazette, published on October 6, 1942, announced 2 George Medals, 6 appointments to various grades of the Order of the British Empire, 6 British Empire Medals, and 2 King's Commendations for brave conduct. PQ-17 was and would remain the largest loss of a British convoy in the Second World War.